Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, back with another video for you guys. I'm here to do a read-along review for To Benight and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. So here I go. A shadow of darkness gloomed over the island of Welshport like a menacing fog, as the authorities, led by the new constable of the island, Gregory Rains, swarmed the village park in the center of Welshport village, where gunshots were heard in the darkness of night by neighbors. There they found the dead body of Christian Evans and Jacob Lord, still alive but barely. "Get this one to the hospital," Gregory ordered, as two firemen dressed in thick black suits with red-yellow trim quickly lifted Jacob onto a gurney and into a hospital paddy wagon and rushed him off to nearby Welshport Hope Hospital. Gregory then knelt down and observed the bullet-ridden body of the man he replaced as constable. Christian. Christian looked strange to Gregory, stranger than any other body he had seen over the years as a surgeon of the law in Philadelphia. You're from PA. I don't buy that. But Christian's face seemed twisted and tired. His lips looked cracked and dread, as if he hadn't had a drip of water in days. He had lost some weight. His bones were quite visible at his neck and chest. "What is it, sir?" a policeman asked, standing over Gregory. Gregory shook his head, unsure where Christian's life went wrong. His mind had started to falter shortly after his affair with Evie, when they all thought Sebastian was dead. He was losing his grip on reality, which was the reason he was replaced as constable. "He's been through a lot. I don't really know what got him to this place in life, but he's clearly had life kick the shit out of him. And now to die by gun. What a mess," Gregory noted. "I want you to note in the record of his body the manner of his disposition: sickly, worn down, fragile, even marked down. I personally mentioned he looked this way," Gregory again noted. What Gregory Rains didn't know was that Christian's body had been under a battery of medical tests and torture at the hands of Dr. Andrew Kim for weeks. Kim saw an opportunity to use Christian's fractured mind when Christian was taken to Wyncliffe. Kim forced the former constable's mind into an ever darker place than it was. His body into a powerful maw of darkness and sinister, murderous thoughts, thanks to the brainwashing and cellular deconstruction of the experiment with the tissue of a former patient known as the cannibal. And now the poor man lay dead on the cold cobblestone pathways of Village Park. Asleep in his bed, Philip Bragga's face winced in pain, but it was not the pain that he felt physically. It was mental. In his mind, thanks to the sweeping horror that was the coming nightmare, he lay there, the golden brown skin tone, with his torso melting into the pure white of the sheets like caramel oozing onto smooth vanilla. There were beads of sweat sparkling at his forehead, slowly slipping off and pulling on to the soft pillow. In his mind, he was dressed the same, shirtless, house shoes, and his favorite linen pants that he slept in. But he was awake and searching for something in the darkness of a room or a hall. There was no sound in his dream. In fact, it almost seemed as if he were under water. He shouted out for someone, and no one replied to his sounds, yelp, and then he began to float, his pants inflated and he noticed shining of the light from the surface above him. In his mind, he was indeed under water and drowning. He began to try to move, but he just floated in the darkness of this strange black globe of water. He attempted to shake himself free to yank his strong body out of the water that locked him in place, suspending in the murkiness of his nightmare. There was some sort of lighting fluttering about him, something swimming, something circling with scales that hit the light in the transparent tones of green and blue. He could see it, whatever it was, a creature of the sea floating in the black water of the bog he was in. Philippe reached for the creature. Its face turned, and it was clearly a woman's face, some type of female, with with hair floating in his invisible water, but then in the fractals of light coming from the surface, a disemboweled arm latched onto Philip's extended arm, but did not pull him up at first. The arm realized its grip on Philip's arm and reached down and grabbed his head, all five large fingers gripping onto Philip's skull like a man holding on an orb of flesh and bone. The arm from the surface pushed Philip deeper in the dark water, pushing him deeper and deeper to his death. And with the quickness that the switch from arm to head happened, the arm switch ideas and again latched onto Philip's extended arm and yanked him out of the black water onto an invisible shore. Philip, still in the nightmare of drowning in darkness, coughed up water and vomit onto the invisible surface. He was soaking wet still in his pajama bottoms. The invisible shore created by Philip's dream absorbed his vomit and spit up. It vanished before his eyes, and when he turned over to see who saved him, the shock almost killed him. It was Sebastian Lord, his friend, his blood brother, his savior, his terror. Sebastian, Philip said, in his own voice echoed in the chamber of his dream. You were such a good friend to me, Sebastian said in a cold voice, but you've abandoned me. You left me to the darkness just like everyone else. No, Sebastian, I didn't. I didn't abandon you. I've had to be sure that everyone was safe in your wake. There was so much to handle while you were. I don't know where you were brought back to life in this form. I had to watch and help, Philippe said before being interrupted. Lies, Sebastian shouted as he dropped to one knee to face Philip eye to eye. I was left in a cold grave to rise again, and you did nothing but move people whom I love around and around this cursed island, hiding them from me. I needed them. I needed all of them, and you hid. You kept me at bay. I know that now. I know where your loyalties lie, and they are not with me. That's true, Sebastian. I was protecting people from. From what? Sebastian growled, his teeth beginning to peek out from under his top lip. His eyes were cold and black. Philip backed away. From what Eliza did to you. What she did to us. My blood was used to create you. You were a part of. We are a part of each other. You must remember that. I have been spending day in and day out protecting those you love from this person you are today. The change. It's not the Sebastian they knew. I didn't want them to see this version of you, Philip explained. Sebastian moved closer to Philip on all fours like a black cat hunting. It was purring like a cat. His eyes flashed from white to yellow. He was licking his lips, getting closer and closer to his old friend. This version is the ultimate version. The only version it needs to be known and seen, and now and forever shall be who I am. There is no way out for me, for us, Sebastian said in the most sinister way possible. Philip began to back away when suddenly his old friend, the friend he knew since he was a child, hissed like a cursed, crazed animal and lunged at Philip's neck, ready to bite and drink blood. Philip screamed and saw that in the background of the darkness of his dream, he saw the sea creature rise out of the water and pull Sebastian's leg backwards away from Philip, but Sebastian latched onto Philip's arm and scratched his way down, causing blood to pour out. Philip screamed in pain, and suddenly he was awake in bed, alone. He was breathing heavily, sweating. A pool of sweat formed in the indentations of his neck, just above his collarbone. Philippe looked to his left and saw that Celeste was not in bed. She got up and went down the hallway, following the candlelight, where he found Celeste at the kitchen table writing out notes to a telegram. Celeste, Philippe asked, startling her in the seat. She shifted her body weight away from him so he could not see the growing baby in her belly. My God, you're covered in sweat. Are you sick? She asked, jumping up from the table and purposely making her nightgown flow out so that her baby was again camouflaged. I'm fine. I'm fine. I just had a really horrible dream, that's all. You were. What are you doing up so late? Philip asked, looking at the cuckoo clock. I was writing a letter, a telegram to my brother Jonathan, she said. Now, so late? I couldn't sleep and was thinking about him and had to get this on paper before I forget or put it off. Now I haven't seen him in so long that I thought it was now or never. Please go back to bed. I'll be in just a moment, she said, his hands on his warm, naked shoulders. Are you okay? Philip asked, noticing she was quite pushy to get him back to the room. Of course I am. It's just this thing with my brother has been on my mind lately, and I really need to get a hold of him, Celeste said, not mentioning she was summoning her brother Jonathan to tell him the truth about his paternity once and for all. Philippe smiled at his beautiful partner and kissed her on the lips. She felt the love he had for her into her like an elixir of powerful passion that only he could give her. She loved him in return, but the secrets she's held inside of her, both figuratively and literally, burned like wildfire in her mind. She loved Philip more than anything, but she had to handle things with the lords one at a time without Philip knowing. Philippe returned to his room and sat on the side of the bed. He reached over to a side table and opened to the top drawer and removed a white folded handkerchief and wiped down his torso from all the nightmare's sweat. The room atmosphere was heavy, the air thick, with perfumes of the evening seeping in through the window. When he went to the window to open it and let out a gulp of fresh air, he thought of the nightmare again, and he thought of the strange sea creature that saved him from Sebastian's grasp. God help me, he whispered to himself as the night fog crept along the cobblestone streets of the village outside. In a candlelit chapel deep in the center of Terramore House, as the clock struck midnight hour, Rebecca Lord knelt on an originally carved kneeler with a red velvet pay hidden under overflowing black dress, her back carved up over the kneeler, her mind deep in prayer, as her rosary beads clicked away in her bony and feminine hands. Her lips mouthed prayers in silence as the flickering light of the candles lit her in an orange glow. Rebecca was praying for her son Jacob, who had caused a horror scene at dinner that night and attacked Evie. When all his secrets were revealed, he felt cornered, Rebecca thought, like the walls were closing in on him. She didn't yet know of the scene at the park. She prayed for Sebastian too, and for Evie, who was nursing a cut the neck from the knife Jacob held to her throat. She rolled the beads in her hands and began to pray for Celeste, her 11-year-old granddaughter, who just happened to be standing in the doorway of the Terramore Chapel. As Rebecca prayed for with her eyes closed, she began to see dark spots come together and make a large black blob in her mind. She ignored it, continued to pray as the candles flickered in their glowing orange light, and then the dark blob of black in Rebecca's mind formed the body and the frame of her son Jacob. He looked at her. He was crying. He was screaming, and he fell to the ground onto a puff of smoke. Rebecca gasped and opened her eyes just as before, but one of the candles had been extinguished and the smoke was floating above the blackened wick. Grandmother, a sweet voice from the chapel doorway spoke. It was Charlotte. What are you doing out of bed, darling? It's late, Rebecca said, ushering her granddaughter into the chapel and into her arms. Are you praying? Charlotte asked. Yes, Rebecca said, cuddling her granddaughter. Are you praying for Daddy? She asked sweetly of Jacob, who had caused such a terrible scene just hours before when all his lies were exposed when Sebastian and Evie returned. Rebecca nodded her head, confirming who she was praying for. Daddy did terrible things, Grandmother. Terrible. I wish he was different. I wish he was nicer. I wish he had never done what he did. He hurt Sebastian and Evie so much, the young Lord Heir said, looking down on the marble floor shyly. I know, my love. I know. He'll have to come to terms with what he did in his own time, and when he does, we will love him just the same. On the bright side, Sebastian and Evie are home. They're safe now, Rebecca added, showing her maternal. I missed Sebastian. It was like he vanished, then came home, and everything had a chance of being back to normal again when he was gone. I don't know. I was less happy. I want to be happy again, Charlotte said. You love him, I know, Rebecca smiled. Do you think he missed me? Charlotte wondered, her blue eyes sparkling. How could he not? You're the love of his life. My dear Sebastian adores you. He always has. When you were just a baby and your daddy brought you home, Sebastian was just a boy of 16. He cuddled you and kissed you, so he always wanted a sibling. And since his mama was no longer with us, somehow God provided him with you. It was like a dream come true for him, Rebecca explained. Really, Charlotte exclaimed, glowing as the spirit of Sebastian's mother, Sabrina, warmed inside of Charlotte's little body, remembering how loved Charlotte was by her son Sebastian. Oh, yes, he loved you forever. As for Daddy, well, like I said, he'll come around and realize what he's done in his own time. Do you believe that after all he's done? Charlotte asked. Rebecca paused. She wasn't sure what to say. She knew that in her heart of hearts that some kind of reckoning would come for her son, Charlotte's father. But Rebecca wanted to let that be up to the God she prayed to, the same God she prayed to bring back her son David and have save her daughter Victoria. Those prayers had not come to fruition, but in the strength of her faith, she held on to the hope that for Jacob her prayers would be answered. I believe that everything will come to a head, and your father will learn the error of his ways. Even the darkest cloud in the sky shed its rain, to once again fly clean and bright. Your father just needs to let the rain go from his cloudy heart, Rebecca answered sweetly. Charlotte smiled aloud, allowing the words to flow from her grandmother's heart. But Charlotte was no ordinary child. She knew that Jacob was a monster. Her father did things that not even God could forgive. And for all her strength and power, Rebecca had broken down this evening and allowed the tragedy of her son's, Jacob's scheme, to soften her. Charlotte looked over at a large wooden crucifix in a chapel that was over 175 years. It was mounted on a large mirror plaque that shined in the candlelight, and the plaque's reflection to Rebecca's back was the spirit that dwelled inside young Charlotte, the spirit of Sabrina Spencer Lord, Jacob's first victim and his brother David's late wife. Sabrina, whom Jacob had been so obsessed with to the point of murdering her and framing David, knew exactly what kind of man Jacob was, and he was not going to go without a fight. And the scene at the park was proof of that, as the grandmother and granddaughter cuddled in the chapel in the candlelight. Jane, the maid, came and begged her pardon for interruption in a moment of private prayer. Ma'am, there's something in the drawing room for you, Jane said. At this hour? Rebecca asked. The servant nodded. Yes, and Rebecca and Charlotte followed her to the drawing room, where Dr. Peter Ward was standing in front of the fireplace with his back turned to them, staring up at the portrait of Rebecca's late husband and his old friend Albert. As a heavier set and an older man, Peter was seemingly out of breath from his dash up the Terramore from the hospital. When the Lord woman entered, Dr. Ward turned and composed himself by wiping his sweaty brow with a white linen handkerchief. Miss Lord, Mrs. and Mrs. Lord, I apologize for coming at this hour, but I'm afraid this couldn't wait. I should say so. It's almost one of the morning, and my granddaughter will have to be up for her lessons. Rebecca snapped, her notorious hard exterior showing once again. Ma'am, there's been an incident in the village earlier this evening, and I wanted to be the one to alert you before the morning came. I know how you don't like to be surprised, Dr. Ward said. As he continued to speak, it was as if the words were not coming out of his mouth any more. It was just sound. Then he finally got to the late night attempted murder of Jacob, who was now fighting for his life at the Hope Hospital. Rebecca gasped and grabbed Charlotte's hands tightly. Charlotte's eyes widened in shock, and in her mind the ghost of Sabrina, who lived in her like a second conscience, celebrated. Rebecca defeated all the praying she had done, all the masses she tended. She felt as if there was nothing she could do, no guidance or wise words. No prayer could right the lost ship that was her family. In her mind, she felt like a total failure in that moment. Not only she had lost Sebastian to Eliza's spell of vampirism, but her other son David was also gone from their lives, lost to a scandal involved the murder of his wife Sabrina. Both men were casualties to the curse that had such a chokehold over them all. And now Jacob fell victim to a would-be murderer. She clung to her prayer in hopes for some sort of light from heaven to reach her and her family, but subconsciously Rebecca wished to sell her good soul for something to come along the way and change the trajectory for her family's path. Save us all, she whispered to herself as Dr. Ward's voice trailed off explaining Jacob's condition. In the darkness of the human mind, we can move about as if we were in another world. In the mind of the vampire, Sebastian was awake and floating, still remaining in the black fog of the subconscious mind where he was with Philip. He floated there under the dark, invisible water with his eyes open as the creature with the female face and green and blue scales swarmed around him. She circled with him, swiftly swimming near his face, and looked him in the eye almost too fast for him to see who it was. It was Alice Winterbourne, the mythical mystical woman who had unknown sources of power. She swam around and around him as he floated in the center of the bog. Now alone, since Philip was awake, she her whipped her tail in his face, and he reacted to her to pull. He reached for her to pull her close enough to bite, but was suddenly awoken in the midst of the night by Evie. Sebastian, Evie said, as they both lay in bed in dark, secluded part of the Terramore house, you're losing and you're tossing and turning. Are you all right? He shook his head as if to shake out the image of Alice in her creature form from his head. I was just having a dream, he replied, starting to feel somewhat human again. Evie smiled and moved closer into his arms as they cuddled in their bed. She only had a few hours before the sun would rise, and when he would need to go into hiding, she hugged him close. He tightened his hold on her. I've missed you. I've missed you, he said sweetly. I have to. It feels like it was all a bad dream. A dream, yes. But it's real and now it's over. I'm so glad everyone has had a chance to come to terms with what I can't even say it, Sebastian said. With what you've become, Evie added, finishing his thought. Yes, I don't think we truly understand it, Sebastian. Not really. It's so difficult to wrap our minds around, but all we know is that we all have you and we are happy you're not dead. It's a miracle that everyone in your family just wants to celebrate, Evie said. Celebrate, he said, smiling. Did you see little Charlotte's face when she saw me for the first time since I went away? She lit up like the sun. I hope that I can live up to her light. She's the heart of this family. Little Star is a beautiful child, Sebastian added, lovely. Sebastian, she said, speaking of children, now that you are back, now that we can finally start our lives together for real, this time I want to have your child, she whispered. Sebastian looked down at her bright green eyes. He couldn't believe his ears after all the pain and suffering they had shared in the last year. They had finally reunited, and even though their lives were in somewhat of a strange place, she was still willing to have his child. It had been it had never occurred to him that they'd continue in the marriage as usual, even though he could not live as normal with her. But what about me? What about all this? He asked, unsure of what she really understood what she was saying. I don't care. I love you. You love me. Let's make a child together to bridge our love. Don't you don't you want that too? She asked, holding on to his naked body under the sheets. He did, he truly did, and without a second thought he rolled on top of her and kissed her passionately. She didn't need to answer her with words. The passion lovemaking gave her the answer she wanted. He made her feel like her skin was on fire, a fire of true love, something she had never felt before. Her whole body was in ecstasy. She could feel his sweat on his back. He could feel hers too. Their two bodies coming together as one in the candlelight glowing like two ambers in a fireplace, hot like the surface of the sun, in hopes that soon she'd be with his child. As he kissed her on the neck, he could feel the throbbing blood in her jugular, her pulse race, showing the racing heart beat of a woman in the throes of making love. His eyes went black, his mouth open, feeling her jugular with his tongue. He kept biting her and drinking from her, turning her into what he was. As she dug her fingers nails deep into his back, he lifted his head, forcing himself not to bite, and saving her from his own existence. I love you, she whispered in a breathy voice into his ear. He kissed her neck and hoped that they were to bring a new life into the world. He'd be far away from it. He wanted to give Evie what she wanted, his child, but feared how his new life would damage the little ones as it grew up. As the sun rose over Welshport Island, the news of the terrible events overnight filtered through town. People stopped on street corners, gossiping about Jacob Lord's hospitalization and the death of the terrorized former Constable Evans. People were in shock, and what they heard leak out of the constable's office of the supposed confrontation between the two men, and someone mentioned a gun. Look at it's right here in the paper. Lord Ayr shot. One man told his friend, reading the headline of the local paper as they were smoked outside of a newsstand. Think he deserved it? The other man wondered as he fiddled with his handkerchief. What do you think? The first man replied, smirking devilishly as he tipped his hat to his friend. Over at a Rummery Cafe, two older women gossiped as their morning tea. I heard it was some sort of altercation at the Terramore, as if Rebecca needed any more horrors in her life. What happened next is beyond me, she said as she sipped her tea. The little woman across from her in a blue hat rolled her eyes and nodded in agreement. There's more. My friend Mavis Collins is friends with Judith Donnelly. Judith's cousin is Jane, as the maid at Terramore, and I have you know that there was indeed something very peculiar happening last night at the mansion. I've never really understood why they kept themselves so cooped up in those stone walls. It's no wonder half that family has lost their minds and gone mad. Both women agreed that the lords were perfect subjects for fodder. And as if the family awoke, the papers they produced and printed via their own companies began to circulate over the breakfast table. I can't believe he's dead, Evie said to Celeste, who had arrived from her own home for Charlotte's morning lessons, who didn't seem to be surprised about Christian's downfall. He was on a path that no one could really control. We all saw him slowly going deeper into madness, Celeste observed. He was so kind to me. He wanted to protect me, and I felt like I let him down. I didn't do enough. I should have supported him like he supported me, Celeste. My God, I failed him, Evie replied, guilt-ridden of Christian's death. You had no idea how bad it would get, Evie. You had no control over any of it, Celeste said. But he loved me, and truth be told, I think at one time I loved him, too, even for a brief moment. I did, Evie confessed. Charlotte's heart sank, but she knew the reality of the situation and replied, Evie, something in him just snapped, and that's why he went to Wincliffe. and the staff there should have protected him more and not let him escape to do whatever he was going to do in the park that night, Celeste added. Evie lifted a brow at the mention of Wickliffe. She knew all too well how Dr. Andrew Kim treated the patients there. I wouldn't even dream of putting all my eggs in that basket. Wickliffe and Dr. Kim have a lot of answering to do. I hope someone finally does start asking the questions. What they did to Alice and me, I'll never forgive, Evie nodded. No thanks to Jacob, Celeste reminded her. No thanks to Jacob, Evie replied. Speaking of perhaps, I should rearrange Charlotte's schedule to take her to the hospital to see her father. Celeste wondered. Evie put her hands up to her neck where the cut was still visible from Jacob putting the knife to her. He was like another person, someone deranged. He could have killed me, Evie said, looking off into the distance. Thank God he didn't. Thank God for Sebastian, Celeste replied to Evie's smile. Is everything okay? Nick asking, entering the breakfast room. The woman confirmed. They women confirmed they were. What a strange turn of events. Was everyone heard? Has anyone heard from the new constable about who could have shot him? Nick added to as he put down his own copy of the Welshport Globe. There aren't many details. I just hope whatever happened, we can keep it from Charlotte as best we can. She doesn't need to know all the gory details, Celeste said just as Rebecca and Charlotte entered the Aaron Hampstead Rebecca's personal page. She already knows. Good morning, Rebecca replied as she motioned for Charlotte to take her seat at the table. Good morning, Miss Sword. Are you okay? Evie asked, truly concerned. It seems the devil has laid his eyes on us once again, hasn't he, Celeste? Charlotte's lesson should have been moved to later this afternoon. I think it's best that we take her to see Jacob at the hospital. Is that okay? Rebecca asked, her stiff upper lip the envy of everyone at the table. Of course, ma'am, Celeste replied. Good, Rebecca said. Miss Sword, is there anything I can do? Please let me know. I am at your disposal. No matter what Jacob has done, I know you're concerned nonetheless. If you need me to take care of things with the household, I'm here, Evie said. Thank you, Evangeline, but I'm sure there are other more pressing issues on your schedule, considering my grandson's. Rebecca paused, unsure of what to say predicament she chose. Evie smiled uncomfortably, unsure of how to take Rebecca's words, as no one truly comprehended the details of Sebastian's new life. As they sat at the table and ate their breakfast, no one even mentioned of thought to ask Sebastian where Sebastian was. It was bizarre, feeling especially for Evie, who wanted to shout it from the mountaintops that not only was he sleeping in the dark room upstairs, but they were going to try for a child. Rebecca was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of Sebastian in the house, but her love for her family was just as strong a force as any kind of spell Eliza could place on any one person. Rebecca would once again look the other way and let Evie have her husband close. Mrs. and Mr. Lord, they just arrived for you, Georgina said, entering the room with a telegram for Evie and Nicholas. Nick took it and opened it. He read the words to the newspaper, put his hand over his mouth in shock. Nicky, what is it? What's it say? Evie asked as he slowly lowered the shining solid silver fork in her hand. It's from Mom. She says Nick couldn't bring himself to say what was on the letter. Not more bad news, not after everything they had survived. Nicholas, what is it? Rebecca asked. Nick handed the telegram to his sister Evie and then got up and stood behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, preparing her for the news It was written on the page. Evie, with a stoic and brave voice, read the telegram, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Evie, Celeste said as Georgina sat next to her, "My mother writes that my father died 2 weeks ago. He he's dead," Evie said as Nick silently cried behind her. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I will send your mother funds to help with his funeral. Richard Jordan was a very kind man when we met all those years ago. I am very sorry," Rebecca said. "Oh, Evie, Nicky, I am so sorry," Charlotte said, leaping to her feet and hugging Evie, who broke down in her friend's arms. "There's no need to send anything, Miss Jordan," Miss Lord, Nick replied. "My mom is on a ship on her way here. The telegram was sent to us on the day she left from Liverpool. She will be here in a few months. Her trip was a long one. She purchased a multi-stop journey to save money," Nicky explained. "I see," Rebecca answered. "She has no one in England. I hope that you won't mind if she stays here until we find a home in the village. I understand it's too much, especially with how much your own family is going through," Nick added. "Nonsense. The Jordans are a part of us now, all of you. We'll be happy to have your mother, Aurora, here for as long as she would like," Rebecca replied kindly. "Charlotte, go on, finish your milk, and come with me. She could freshen you up to see your father." "I don't want to go, grandmother," Charlotte replied to Rebecca's annoyance. "Young lady, listen to your grandmother." What did I do? I lose my place. "Young lady, listen to your grandmother." "Go on now, let's get a fresh dress on," Charlotte replied to her pupil Evie. "Nick, if you need me or anything that I can help you with, please let me know," she said, standing up and leaving with Rebecca, Charlotte, and Hampstead to start their day. As Charlotte got up, Nick saw her growing baby bump through the various layers of petticoats and corsets. He squinted and realized just she was as she was looking, and then commented to the others in the room, "She's pregnant." Evie and Georgina looked at him strangely and noticing, but then looked at each other and realized that they had noticed a small tummy too. Evie dried her eyes, and although her heart was broken, she smiled when thinking about the possibility that her best friend was pregnant when she was trying to get pregnant herself. Georgina, on the other hand, did not seem too happy about the possibility, knowing full well how close Jacob had gotten to Celeste. Now that she was Charlotte's governess, Georgina's own history of Jacob came to the mind, because she was really Mary hidden in Georgina's body. It made her skin crawl to think that perhaps Jacob had done the same to Celeste that he did to Mary. As the wind blew over two small islands of the coast of Maine in the Frenchman Bay, but the trees on Good Island swayed back and forth in the current, Eliza Good paced in front of her burning hearth, awaiting news from Welshport. Her heart was pounding, and she didn't sleep the whole night. She thought about what she had done. It seemed as though her whole world had all the good and bad had accumulated in the decision she made the night before. She thought about the terrible way her sister Sabrina died, and how her daughter Mary's child Celeste was taken from her, and she thought about her poor nephew Sebastian. And everything gone through, he had gone through. She was and wasn't responsible for him. She hoped she could finally move on now that it was done. Eliza's mind went back Back to the night before, as the yellow glow of the fire in her hearth sent out a warmth that kissed her face and drew her mind to the night of the shootings in the park. The night of the shootings, Eliza was uneasy all night, ang- angry even. The spirits all around her were telepathically showing her visions all night. Eliza's mind was racing. She could not get the warnings from her spirit guides out of her mind, keeping her awake. She saw the altercation at the Terremore house. She saw Jacob's crimes finally being exposed. She saw him in a page lashing out at his whole family. Eliza had had enough. She rushed into her spell room and grabbed the thick leather-bound book of spells that had been passed down from generations of witches before her. She could sense the book angry, was angry. It was hot to the touch. She hot it sensed her fingers tips, causing her to trip it to the ground. The book flipped open on its own, as if a wind had flipped the pages. Eliza was shocked to see the spell appear as it lay open face. She fell to her knees, genuinely praise of the ancient spell. This was no ordinary witch's curse. It was showing Eliza a spell that was off limits to many witches. Should only be used in the utmost urgency. Eliza felt this urgency. She sat back on the floor. She closed her eyes. She extended her arms and hummed a deep hum that came from her stomach, as the spell said to do. She held her humming to a deep into her bones. Then the lights of the candles began to flicker of the all alone without a single touch extinguishing the flames, all on their own, leaving Eliza in the shadows of the room. The summon occurred. Eliza summoned the shadow of a man who was born in the stars, born in the midst of the legends of all the sorcerers. The witches of Eliza now extended the coven called him the Hunter. He was he was as powerful as a storm and controlled Eliza's powers, as she had pledged her life to him to gain her strength so many years ago when she was immortal. The pages of the book of spells flipped in the ghostly wind, and she called in the hunter, who stood before Eliza in a dark cloak as a golden necklace with a pentagram sparkled in the firelight. In a deep, ghostly voice, the hunter asked, "What is it, thy request, witch? Thou hast brought me forth for a favor of death." "Of death," she replied, removing Jacob's gun from the her upon pocket and sliding it across the cabin floor to him. The hunter snickered and asked, "I need no such mortal weaponry. It must be done with this firearm to make it seem as though another mortal has caused the death. No one must know it was you," Eliza explained. "The gun's necessary." "And whom shall I take from this earth in thy name? A reminder, the price of this is thy life and the life of thy loved ones for all time." Eliza nodded. "Jacob Lord, you know the price," he repeated. "I know the price, and I accept it. Take Jacob, but again do it with this weapon. As to shroud it as the mortal crime, he must pay for his crimes against Sebastian, or against Sabrina, against Mary, against Sebastian, against Evangeline. This is the only way," Eliza explained, requesting the hunter to not kill him with powers, but with the gun. The hunter agreed and vanished into the blue and black cloud of mist that took him from the cabin to the park. to do Eliza's bidding. Eliza had been waiting for the hunter to return all night and unto the next day and night. She expected him to come back right away, but he did not. He left her waiting like a click ticking its hours. As she stared into the earth, thinking it was about she had done, the front door cabin suddenly blew open in a violent bang, throwing leaves and dirt and lost grass to spray and startled Eliza, who jumped in her skin and looked at the open door. There's a figure in dark clothes, a cloak black as the night, was standing in silence. Enter, Eliza said, relieved to see the cloaked figure finally returning. Where have you been? It's been more than a day, the witch asked. Do not question me, the blank-faced spirit growled. It is done. The hunter said nothing and only extended his arm that was covered in a dark cloak and handed Eliza back the gun, the very same gun Mary had used to shoot Sebastian that Eliza hid away for her daughter. Eliza smirked as the hunter nodded, finally signaling his part was done. Eliza grabbed the gun and replaced it in a drawer with a secret panel that covered the gun so no one could find its location. I am pleased. The Lords deserve peace in their lives after all that I've done to them, and this one last death will end their pain once and for all, the witch said, seemingly contradicting herself. Jacob was the source of so much chaos in his family's life that Eliza saw his elimination as one door for then all to finally find real peace without his constant scheming and treachery. The hunter moved strangely in his ghostly body. It moved in a way that sent a sound wave out, no words, to Eliza, who understood the telepathic sound. The witch winced as the ground gave her pain before she replied. How would killing Jacob bring them happiness? The rich. How would killing Jacob bring them happiness? The witch responded. He is the root of all evil. Since childhood, since his birth, he is the rotten of society incarnate. By removing his monstrous soul from this earth, I saved that family from more pain and suffering, which he should soon bring, no doubt, she added. The hunter then spoke. This root of evil does not dwell on this planet. However, I find thy thought of such things interesting, the hunter said, as if to insinuate there was someone even more evil than Jacob. There was another. His life was taken too, the hunter added. Another? Another killed by you? Eliza asked in shock. The hunter nodded. Yes, Christian Evans. You killed him too? The black-cloaked figure nodded. Yes again, confirming. Eliza thought for a second, remembering how close he came to arresting Mary for Sabrina's murder. She remembered how she erased the memory, hoping that he'd let go of accusing her daughter of the murder. Then she replied coldly, collateral damage. I suppose now that it's done, it's back to your place, and secret will stay between us. Understood? The black figure agreed. But remember her or the price she paid. A time will come, Eliza Good, when I will return ready to be as I once was in human form. Thou must preserve thyself for me. If thy death shall come premature, the bond will be broken, and I will be able to run free. That is a promise. Beware. My freedom means thine own destruction. Thy powers bestowed upon and gifted to thee by me will be useless because they will be mine as payment. Thy life for the life of another will fuel my return to this place. Never forget what has been promised me, thy whole life eternal. Eliza gulped. She would remember and hopefully not forget what she had done. Then in a flash of bright light the dark creature, the hunter within the cloak, released itself from inside the garment and floated over to Eliza. And in a blue and black spinning orb, the figure in this form continued to move closer and closer. Eliza's eyes rolled, got wider and wider. It wondered of what she was seeing. Then, in the reflection of the window, it was next to Eliza. The figure's face finally appeared, the face of death. The monster that takes us all to the depths of the universe opened its eyes and evaporated in a puff of black smoke above Eliza, who fell to her knees and breathed in the smoke left after death itself, evaporated into thin air. The final binding of two, mortal witch and sinister soul of hell. Eliza, her heart pounding, her eyes glowing in a strange black light, became overpowered by the darkness, and she spit out a thick liquid of black tar. She had now bound herself even more with the dark arts, all in the effort to end Jacob's reign of terror once and for all. She had promised herself the whole body to this being, and if she were to die, this creature would become a living being and come to earth to retrieve what Eliza could not. Her death, their mythical pact, could only occur naturally. She was bound to this earth to life until her old age took her to the world of the dead. Then and only then would this creature release her from her pact. She could not die any other way than old age. I am bound to thee, she said to the dark spirit who gave her so much power. I am bound to thee. All right, guys, that's the read along. Really, really good. Really, really good. The start of the new chapters of To Be Night and Beguile. I will definitely leave a link in the description box. But it is really, really, really good. I like the interaction between the Lord family and how they're mentioning everything that happened prior at the end of book 2, sort of reminding you. And but also a new character that we sort of, I think, got it, if I remember correctly, we did sort of get a glimpse of in book 2 when there was a dark figure that stood in the doorway. We didn't know who it was. I think that was sort of teased for this book, in my opinion, which was the hunter. Really, really interesting character that had given Eliza her powers. So Eliza's now indebted to him even more, because he caps some people. I wonder if he's related to the Shadow. Really, really good, guys. Go check out Book 3, Chapter 1, To Be Night and Beguile, written by John Philip Bencourt. I will do another read along when the next chapter drops. I'll see you guys.